Good morning. Congratulations for making it here. For those of you that went out last night a couple times. First and foremost, was everyone excited by the demos that you saw during the keynote? Was that good? Did you like them, hated them, didn't go to the... Okay, good. So here's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about some of the new insights that came out of the report and hopefully give you some new things to talk about when you get back to your own audiences. My name is Jason Buffington. I'm VP of Market Strategy. My main job at Veeam is to curate this independent research. And independent's the right word for it. So these are not necessarily Veeam customers. We reach out and we use third-party analyst firms. They go and ask, or they find the organizations. The only thing we have influence on is what kind of organizations to talk to. And specifically, what we have them talk to, I'm a little off order, specifically what we have them talk to is an organization who self-reported that they suffered at least one cyber breach in the preceding 12 months, right? We wanted to talk to people who'd actually been through it. We hard-quoted to make sure that everyone that's in it is either who responded. A third of them are folks responsible for prevention, security professionals. A third of them were responsible for remediation, backup admins, right? And a third of them are the executive stakeholder who's ultimately responsible, CISO. And then, of course, this represents organizations of all sizes. So that's what we're going to walk through. So we ask independent organizations to go and get data for us on those topics. And then we're going to share some of those results today. Now, I mentioned I'm Jason.
Skipped right over.
Right over you.
I'm Jeff. Nice to meet you all. Jason and I are colleagues on the product strategy team.
And Jeff spends a lot of his time in the cyber half of the world, whereas I'm a little bit more heads down, just kind of focusing on the numbers and the spreadsheets. So Jeff, let's talk about the statistic that probably inspires. Why do we go off and get independent research specific on ransomware? Why is it that everyone is talking about ransomware? Would you like to unpack this one to kind of get us started?
Yes. So if you remember last year's study that we did on this, the numbers were just about the same, a little bit worse, in fact, but 75% in Data Protection Trends reported that they had been attacked in the previous year. What that means is that the threat actor got on the network and tried either successfully or unsuccessfully to set off an attack. It does not mean that someone tried to get on the network, because that's happening basically to all of our customers probably hundreds of times a day.
Oh, look, it happened again. Oh, look, it happened again. Oh,
yes,
look, it happened. Yeah.
Exactly. Now, if you look at this, 25% didn't have that happen to them out of 1,200 worldwide. As the slide points out, more of the respondents in Data Protection Trends were hit 4, 5, 6, or more than 6 times a year than weren't hit at all. If you think about the fact that recovery typically takes, on average, depends on who you ask, but it's usually in the neighborhood of 3 weeks or a little bit more, organizations that are getting hit 4 times or more a year are basically in the business of recovering from ransomware. And there is a non-trivial percentage of respondents that is the business their company is in right now.
And I would just point out to you, as much as I like all the data that's on this slide, I think there's a flaw in the green data, right? Which is kind of weird because we like green here at Veeam. Because 25% of the organizations believe they weren't hit. And I think that's probably a better verb, right? And the reason is because for many of them, remember, this is, did they get hit over the last 12 months? Well, we know from other data that the average gestation rate of after the bad actors in the environment before they make their presence known is around 200 days, a little more than half of the year. So let's assume that there's a percentage of those green folks who just don't know that they've been breached yet at the time they respond to the survey. But best case, 1 out of 4 orgs, best case. All right, so that's what inspires the report. So let's talk about what we're gonna cover for today. And I did not match a clock, so I have no idea how we're doing on time, so we're just going to keep talking until they kick us out. But the things we're going to talk about from the research is, again, from the 1,200 organizations that actually experienced these attacks, was the organization considered ready? How effective was the attack? What was the impact on the organization? How successful were they in recovering? Spoiler alert, not as much as you'd like. And then what were some lessons learned from those folks that went through it? And hopefully all of this serves as lessons learned for y'all so we can learn from their experiences over time. Let's get into the first one, which is organizational alignment. This is, I think, a really interesting question. We asked organizations just how aligned is the backup team with the cyber team, right? So it's one thing to have a single strategy and we're all in this together. But if the teams aren't talking, that's going to make that much harder. Jeff, you spent a lot of time with C-level folks, a lot of CIOs and CISOs along the way. One of the things I thought was really interesting, certainly the fact that, 65%, 63% of organizations think that either a significant improvement or a complete overhaul is necessary. But remember, we surveyed 3 different personas. Of the 3 personas, the backup admin was the least happy of the 3, and the CISO happy was, I'm going to call him optimistic.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
It is interesting that the people who are closest to actually doing the restores, that are most responsible for doing this, are the most pessimistic about their possibility of recovery. If you consider that 63% of respondents said significant or complete overhaul is required between the way that security teams and infrastructure teams work with each other, and it seems incredible to say this in 2024, but the message has still not gotten through to a lot of organizations that are out there. We had a customer advisory board at this event last year, and we talked with senior leaders on the infrastructure teams of many of our customers. What we heard from them then, and as you can see from the data, it has not changed a whole lot in the last year, is that a lot of times the security teams deliberately do not talk to the infrastructure teams. They play their cards close to the vest deliberately because they think that that's part of their role is limiting the number of people who need to know anything about what they're doing on the security side. That is bizarre to say, but it's actually true. And the stats kind of bear that out.
And again, what we hope you find from this is take this data back. If you are self-identify as a backup person, right? If the data shows, by the way, average was 63%, backup admins, 75%. 3 out of 4 believe that there is a problem between how you interact with your cyber peers along the way. Use this data. Start that conversation. Go to your boss's boss and say, can we have an honest and hard conversation on, are we talking frequently enough about the right things? Is this us? And in fact, if you take those same questions and let your own people answer, you probably aren't going to be too far off the mark. All right. So one of the other questions that we wanted to kind of look into is that was around the internal dynamics between the teams. Were you ready? When you download the report, and the QR code's on every slide, so just download that whenever you can. But when you download the report, some of the other questions were around how did the teams rally together during the attack, and then a significant portion of organizations pulled in a third party as part of the remediation process. On your worst day, you are not going to be at the best of your game, right? And so with that, it is important to have some even-keeled, level-headed, experienced folks that can help you through this. And in fact, if you look on the bottom of the slide, only 6% of organizations did not bring in a third party as part of their remediation effort. Only 6%, and I love that number. I frankly think those 6% got it wrong. But the other 94% of organizations did bring in one or more third parties along the way. Jeff, talk about the greens, and then there's some blue that is not by coincidence on this chart. Let's talk through that.
Exactly. So, of course, if you get hit with a ransomware attack, you're going to involve your backup vendor. We have a dedicated support team here at Veeam that does that every day for customers. You're going to involve your security vendors. If you look at the blue bars, the ransom negotiators and the security specialists for forensics, who here has sat in on one of the Coveware sessions so far at Veeam? Is anyone? Okay, so Coveware, now part of Veeam, these blue bars are what they do, right? They handle ransom negotiations and they handle security forensics. What's interesting in terms of planning, and again, getting back to the coordination between the infrastructure team and your security team, there are still organizations that I talk to that are not clear about what the timelines are going to be if they get hit by ransomware. They are not clear that this is probably going to be a multi-day to multi-week event with a lot of people involved, working basically around the clock. And it's very helpful to look at this and recognize how many cooks are going to be in the kitchen when you're trying to do this recovery, and think beforehand about the coordination, about the communication, about what the call lists are going to look like, and maybe talk with management realistically about what the recovery timeline is going to look like, because there are so many people from outside your organization involved.
And I just want to also point out, so we've talked about the green bars, we've talked about the blue bars, but I also got to give props to that purple bar in the middle of the screen. It is amazing to meet the partner, how critically important reseller partners are, the service provider ecosystem is in helping organizations remediate from attacks. It never fails to amaze me. I go into a large workshop with a premier customer, and there's the security team and some executives and some business stakeholders. The backup team's there, the IT operations team is there, sometimes there's DevOps there, and they don't know each other. They're actually shaking hands like, oh, who are you? Oh, you're in the same company I am. We just haven't met yet. And the reseller knows them all, right? It is amazing to me how often the reseller actually is the one person who can actually orchestrate this whole thing. And so who else would you rather have in that room? So I've got to give props off to the third-party expertise that can come into these phrases as well. All right, last slide on this one. One of the questions that was asked, again, looking at these 1,200 organizations and the attacks they had, at the time of the attack, how prepared did they think they were? And if you download the report, you'll also get some information on how prepared did they think they were, how prepared were they after the fact. There's some interesting numbers there, whether you're looking at the windshield or the rear view. But in this particular slide, we were asking around, do you have a team pre-identified? Did you have a plan? What's in the plan, right? And I will point out, only 2% of the organizations did not have a team pre-identified. Only 3% had a team that had no plan. Right? So 95% of the orgs had a team, had a plan. Jeff, what's in the plan?
Well, if you look at the bars on top, you can see. I will point out, for anyone who likes math as much as I do, the numbers obviously don't add up to 100% because we gave respondents the opportunity to choose a few of the responses,
sure,
but not all of them. So it's sort of weighted. If you look at the long bars, these are the ones selected by most respondents. And it's not a surprise at all that making sure that our backups were good, making sure that we could recover from them were the top items that were listed on there. It's also kind of heartening to realize that the next highest one at 33% was people had arranged for alternate infrastructure. That's important because what we found in this year's survey is that it is very, very common for organizations not to be able to use all of their own infrastructure when they're recovering, either because it's damaged in the attack or because there's ongoing forensics or law enforcement involvement. But
yeah, and we're going to talk about that. We've got data for that one, so that'll be a lot of fun. But yes, I like the fact that what you're seeing is, do I have backups that are verifiably recoverable, right? And in Veeam parlance, that's sure backup, right? I like the fact they have backups that are assured to be clean and survivable, right? So immutability, air gapping, we're going to talk more about that along the way as well. And then yes, that secondary repository.
Yeah, it's very good. What's interesting too, and what's heartening, is that a lot of folks in their incident response playbook had thought clearly about communications. It is very common if you have unified communications, if you have email, if you rely on Teams for those assets to be offline if you've been hit with a ransomware attack. And so it's helpful that a lot of organizations have incorporated thinking about how do I communicate out of band? What are my alternate channels? How am I going to actually get the team working productively on the worst day that our organization ever has?
Okay, so what we want to do, by the way, so if you are taking screenshots, by the way, almost everything here is in the report. You're welcome to download it. Also, if you want, I'll give you an email address, and you can have a copy of all the charts, because what I would love for you to do is to take those charts, put them into your deck, take it to your management, talk about how does this fit with your organization. But if you will email strategicresearch@veeam.com, then we'll send you a link directly to a zip file. You can have all the charts that we're providing for today. All right, that said, we also want to emphasize there's kind of 10 top takeaways that are pretty important. So let's talk about the first two from this section. First one is cyber resiliency starts in the conference room, not in the boardroom, right? So it's all about the planning, far more than the tech, far more than, it's even more before budget, right? Start talking about what you need. And then the second thing, and this comes off of the playbook slide, step one, get a good backup. Step two, test your good backup. Step 3, make sure your backup survives, right? You get those 3 things, you have a chance to recover. We'll talk more about that later. And then step 4, plan where you're going to recover to. If you get those 4 things right, you are well on your way to a plan.
Yep.
Amen?
Absolutely. Yep.
All right, so that's our summary point. So let's talk about the attack. Let's talk about when the event actually happened. Now, by the way, on average, the respondents in this survey suffered 2.1 attacks over the course of the year. 1,200 victims were included, so that gets you a little over 2,600 and some change attacks that were summarized by this. This is the average for many of them. If you want to scare the bejeebies out of your boss's boss, here is your slide. On average, the victims that suffered attacks last year said 41% of their production data set was affected by the attack. Now, 41% is a number, so let me help you with this. 41% is, call it 40, 2 out of 5 of your hard drives, 2 out of 5 of your mailboxes, 2 out of 5 of your databases, 2 out of 5 of your apps. Jeff and I are both proud dads. 2 out of 5 of your kids' pictures, 2 out of 5 of your grandparents' pictures, 2 out of 5 of whatever it is that you care about went into a shredder. That was the average cyber victims experience. Average. Some were more, some were less. 2 out of 5. Of the 2 out of 5 stuff that went into a meat grinder, a little over half was recoverable. So, basic math. 57% was recoverable, 43% was not. 43% of the 41 that got affected, write this down, the average production data loss was 18% of the production farm. 18%. Basically 1 out of 6 stuff.
Right. Between 1 out of 5 and 1 out of 6. There's no organization in this room there's no one in this room that wants to go to their elected leadership, their financial leadership, their executive leadership, and say, great news, if we get hit by a ransomware attack, we're going to lose 2/5 or 18% of the data that we've got out there. That's not something that anyone wants to say to their leaders. But unfortunately, that's the position that we're in.
Now, this is where I'm legally required to remind you these are not Veeam customers that suffered through this.
Right.
Statistically, I guess whatever the percentage of our market share is are represented within this sampling. Your mileage will vary based on your backup and recovery solution and the architecture by which you protect it. And we're going to talk about that over the next few minutes. So that was the damage. Let's talk about how much worse it gets. Jeff, you spend a lot of time with C-levels, and C-levels like to talk money. Let's talk money.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very common for us to think about the ransom paid, especially in the wake, for example, of the Change Healthcare disaster with a $22 million ransom payment and some other large ransom payments that have been made in high-profile attacks lately. However, what people don't think about a lot of times is that while Change Healthcare, just to cite one example, paid a $22 million ransom, the U.S. hospital system, while they were down, was losing, on average, according to the American Hospital Association, $2.1 billion per week during that attack, right? Now, that's an extreme example just because Change sat in the middle of so many other organizations. But even for organizations that aren't in that position, the ransom payment, when it's made, is 32% of the total impact. You have disrupted operations. You have all the expense of bringing in those third parties that we looked at on the other slide. You have reputational damage. You have direct loss of revenue because you're not making or doing whatever it is your organization makes or does. So the effects are extreme, and the ransom itself is only the tip of the iceberg.
Right. But wait, it doesn't really matter how big the bill was at the end. I kind of think of like, when we went out to dinner last night, so there's the cost of the bill, which was the alcohol tab or the appetizers versus the main course, and you always underestimate how much the bar tab is going to be on your whole evening. But at the end of the night, you're going to send in your expenses, and it's all going to get paid back, so it's okay. So certainly if we just file an insurance claim, they're going to get it all paid back, right?
One of the reasons that we like this stat is that if you have financial or executive leadership who are still, in 2024, naive enough to believe that their cyber insurance policy is going to take care of you, make you whole in the event of a ransomware attack, this is a very useful thing to show them. We're going to talk more about insurance in the next couple of slides, but even assuming that you have a policy that covers ransomware attacks, that'll pay ransom, it is not going to take care, on average, of more than 62% of the actual damage that you suffer. If you think about organizations that have small margins, or maybe don't have big cash reserves, it is very easy to see how this kind of attack could really be an existential event for the organization, even if they have insurance.
Yeah, I think about it like, hey, I got into a fender bender in a car, right? So there is the cost of repairing the car. There is maybe the cost of repairing me. That does not get wholly paid. There's a deductible that comes out of that. I got to wait for the insurance guy. There's a problem there. But also, if my car's not working and I'm an Uber driver, I'm now losing revenue because I can't drive around. Right? So now at the end of the day, there's several different ways that it's hitting my pocketbook. And oh, by the way, at the end of the night, State Farm is not going to pay me back for all of that. They're going to hopefully pay me back for the car itself or some part of it. That's what you should take away is, so if we put real numbers on this, for example, as an example, so let's say, for example, just to keep the zeros easy, the ransom is $320,000. We're using the left number, add 4 digits, right? The ransom was $320,000, a little over a third of a million, or less than a third of a million. That means you should project that the entire business impact of the organization is $1 million, right? It's 32%. Now, when everything is done and your CFO and your CIO get together and they take that $1 million business impact to your shareholders and stakeholders and the board, they file for insurance, you're going to get back $620,000 of that $1 million, which means the business lost $380K.
Right.
So anyway, sometimes it helps to kind of take things out of IT parlance. So then a logical question is, okay, if insurance is working like this, do you have it? Do you need it? Let's talk about that.
So there's been a lot of ink lately about the state of the cyber insurance business. There have been congressional hearings with the industry going to the US government and saying, hey, if we get another big globally significant attack, the cyber insurance business might go out of business because it would be so effective. And that has had an effect on the nature of insurance policies that are out there. If you look at this, even for those who have insurance, only 59% had cyber insurance that covered a ransomware attack. 24% have cyber insurance that covers other kinds of cyber incidents, but does not cover them in the case of ransomware attacks.
Right.
And you have to figure that the 59% had to do more and pay more to get that coverage that would actually protect them. What's interesting too, if you look at the 4%, so 1% is not interested, and 3% says we used to but don't currently. I've had numerous conversations with executives whose organizations have made the decision to cease having cyber insurance coverage because it's so expensive and it didn't cover as much as they needed. They just set a big pot of money aside to cover this on their own. Particularly with government, that is becoming the norm now. So.
I think back to yesterday's keynote when Tamika was talking about Fort Lauderdale, and they experienced that flood that happens 1 in 1,000 years, right? So I live in Texas, and if you are in the heartland states, you know that right now there's quite a bit of water getting dropped. I live in Dallas, so I can actually get flood insurance. My neighbors to the south in Houston cannot buy flood insurance. It's not available to sell no matter how much money you'd throw at it, because they know that in Houston, a flood is not just potential, it is probable. And I think you're going to see more and more of that over time. One of the other questions that we ask in the survey is, how has your cyber insurance changed, if you can still get it at all, Jeff?
Right, exactly. And this mirrors exactly the conversations that I've been having with organizations for the past several years. The market continues to tighten for cyber insurance. Several years ago, when this was new, if we dial the clock back 5 years or more, there was kind of a land grab among cyber insurance companies. They all wanted to gain market share. They didn't have good underwriting standards where they could predict what are my losses likely to be, what kind of premiums do I need to charge to make sure I cover those. And as a result, a lot of those companies lost their shirts. And so the standards for getting insurance have been getting much, much tighter. But even aside from the controls, the attestations that you have to make to get insurance, you typically are going to find that your premium has gone up, that your deductible has gone up, and that your benefits, your coverage, has been reduced. If you look at this, only 6% of respondents said, everything's fine, no changes required, everything's like it was, right?
You know, in my entire 30-plus years of adulting, I don't think I've ever had an experience where my insurance stayed exactly the same year over year. And I'm not just talking cyber, I mean,
right.
Ever. All right, a couple more of the key takeaways we want to lean into. The idea that, well, this is in the report, it's actually not in our summary right now. Some of the questions that you may want to lean back into in the report overall is we looked at not just the business impacts and the productivity impacts of the organization, but also the impacts on you. The impacts on the backup admin and the security professional, professionally, personally, mental health, physical health, changes in role, pressure from senior management. There's a lot of things in there that, that affect you. Please go download that and compare that with your own experience. Along the same way, we talked already, the ransom is going to be a small percentage of the overall impact, of which you will not get it all back. And then lastly, insurance continues to rise and therefore help you less, if you can get it at all. All right, which means, Jeff, I guess we're going to have to recover ourselves because insurance is not going to be the savior that we thought it was going to be. All right, if you are taking screenshots, do this one. If you haven't been taking screenshots, do this one. And here's why. If you really want to understand why does everyone in our industry talk about cyber, this is the answer. A couple things. The question was, did you pay and did it help or work or whatever the parlance was? A couple key points. 4 out of 5 organizations paid. Regardless of internal policy, regardless of we will stand up to bullies, regardless of if you have federal prohibition that says you are not allowed to pay, 4 out of 5 paid. More importantly, though, 1/3 of those that paid still could not recover. Just kind of think through what that would be in your own experience. You got hit, you went to the CIO, you opened a Bitcoin account, you sent it across. Either they didn't give you the magic wand or the magic wand didn't work. Either way, you paid, and 1/3 of you that paid still could not recover after. The other side of that, that's the orange versus the red. In green, only 15%. Not quite 1 out of 6 organizations said, no, we didn't pay. We recovered from backups instead. 15%, right? And I'm not even going to draw out the 4%, which was arson, right? There was no ransom asked for. They just did damage while they were there. Veeam has much better marketeers than I do. If I was the marketeer in charge, I would say Veeam's whole mission in life ought to be to help the other 85% of victims say, no, we did not pay, we recovered. But if you really want to write down the stat that exemplifies our industry right now, twice as many, 27 versus 15, twice as many orgs paid but couldn't recover than those that recovered without paying.
Right.
That is the problem statement we're solving for.
Yep, exactly. Our goal is to make that green band bigger. A couple of additional notes about this. That 4% is a small number, but if you cast your mind back to 7 years ago in the spring when the biggest world ransomware attack ever, not Petya, was spreading throughout the world and affecting organizations like Merck and Maersk and a bunch of other large global companies, it was not possible to pay a ransom and recover your data from the NotPetya attack. It was actually wiper malware. And so if there's, again, anybody in your organization that is telling themselves that we can pay a ransom, we can help ourselves, that is not a prudent way to look at your recovery strategy, particularly given the geopolitical uncertainty and instability and conflict that we've got right now that are being weaponized with malware by basically every actor on every side. To put this 81% in perspective as well, we had a security tabletop exercise here on Monday. We had a number of large Veeam customers come in, we gave them a scenario and walked through, okay, here's the scenario, here's what's down, And we threw a little wrinkle in by saying you get partway through the recovery and then you realize that a certain critical application you can't recover. You're going to lose about 1/4 of data. And overwhelmingly at the tables, and I was the facilitator at one of the tables, when we went to the organization, whether it was a bank, a manufacturer, a company that did events, a medical device company, and said, okay, what do you think your senior leadership is going to do if we're in a position where we can't recover data that's really significant to the business? Hands went up. They said we'd pay. We don't want to pay. It's not what we'd prefer to do. But if we were in a position where we couldn't recover, the answer would be, we'll pay. Another thing in terms of policy that's kind of interesting on this, there's a lot of back and forth that you read in the press about whether ransom payments should be forbidden, right? Should the government just say you can't pay ransoms, period? These are sanctioned organizations, you shouldn't do it. The experience of Coveware, now Coveware by Veeam, is that if you forbid people to pay ransoms, what they're ultimately going to do is just open a bank account in the Cayman Islands and sneak around and basically become criminals in order to save their company.
Wait.
So
You're saying if the government tells you to do something or not to do something, you're just going to go around them and do it stealthily and probably unfettered?
go figure, huh?
Oh my gosh. All right. Things that I learned at Veeam. Good. All right. So there's a couple other stats that kind of go into the same thing. Probably we should edit that out in post. Okay, so a couple more stats to kind of come across. When we say only 15% recovered without paying, Jeff's example is perfect. Because what if you can't recover? What if that's no longer on the menu? Right? And so the way that I'll pick on that, Jeff and I work for a very nice gentleman named Dave, but we're going to assume that Dave has thrown me overboard on the water about 1 mile offshore, right? Dave wants to sell me a life preserver, right? Now, if I can swim back to the boat myself, I don't pay for his life preserver. If there's something else floating in the water, I don't pay for the life preserver because I can save myself. So if Dave wants to sell me a life preserver, the first thing he's going to do is remove my ability to save myself. Hoist the ladder, make sure there's nothing else floating around. That's what's happening here. The bad actor, in 96% of cases, is targeting the backup repository as a primary play when they're affecting the environment, so that you cannot save yourself. But wait, it gets worse. Because in 3 out of 4 scenarios, 76% of the time, the bad actor does successfully encumber the backup repository. It removes the ability for you to save yourself. If there was ever a reason to talk about immutability, this is it. Jeff?
It used to be pretty common that we could find organizations that were being hit by ransomware threat actors and could recover because they had non-immutable backup copies sitting up in the cloud, or because they had non-immutable storage snapshots and the threat actor just didn't find them. If you look, it's an arms race. The threat actors are getting more sophisticated. You are virtually guaranteed that they will find and attack every method of data protection that you have. That's why you'll hear us talk a lot about the principle of assume breach as part of Zero Trust. Act as though the threat actor is already on your network and has all of your admin credentials. And what do you do now? If you can protect yourself, then you're not going to be part of the 76% that had backup repositories affected. If not, you're probably going to end up paying a ransom.
Right. Now, one of the other, let's do some myth busting, because there's 2 things that happen in myth busting, especially if you see cyber attacks in Hollywood. The one is that you type in this magic key and all the data is back. Okay, we're good. It actually doesn't work like that. So ransomware tends to encrypt in parallel. You have to decrypt serially. So it takes much longer to recover. Also, let's assume that we're not going to use the magic wand. We're not going to use the decryption tool along the way. We're just going to wipe the server, restore our last good backup, because we do have good backups, and they are clean, they are immutable, and all that. We're just going to restore over the top. We'll be fine. Except for 31% of you won't. So on average, organizations were asked, hey, was there anything that precluded you from just wiping the metal and restoring your last backup? Right? Let's go back to the car analogy, right? Mm-hmm. So when I have a fender bender, I don't get to start getting the car repaired until some nice insurance agent comes out and takes a picture and assesses my damage for me. So forensics, legal, law enforcement, hey, you can't have that server because we still need to see what else they might have taken along the way. In fact, the little green wedge on that right-hand bar, left-hand side, 14%. So 1 in 7 organizations said, no, we could wipe everything. We were able to start from there. 1 in 7. 6 out of 7 organizations were precluded from using some of their original metal and just starting to restore from there. And on average, 31% of the metal was unavailable to be used, which means you either have 31% of extra infrastructure sitting around, or you have the means to power up 31% of your infrastructure worth of metal in somebody's cloud. Amen?
Yep, this is exactly right. And when you're working with the rest of your teams, if your incident recovery playbook doesn't include the idea that 31%, and you don't know which 31% beforehand, right? That 31% of your disks, of your servers, of your ESX hosts, whatever it may be, are not going to be usable when you really need them to recover. It brings up very good questions for your planning, like, do I have all my data sitting up in the cloud? And do I have the ability to spin up infrastructure as a service or platform as a service and do restores to that in a net new, known good environment right away? If your planning does not include that, then you're liable to be waiting longer than you would like when you need to recover from an attack.
So time check, I think we have 7 minutes left.
Let's go.
Okay, so last couple are going to go quick. You know, what we need to do is just kind of cut out some of the edges and round off things. We'll get through things as fast as we can. And unfortunately, for 63% of organizations, they do that during Restore. Your boss's boss is staring over your shoulder, and everyone on the C-level suite is emailing you. You've never met them before, but now they're asking you, how quick are you going to be back up? Right? And so it is human nature to, hey, I'll skip this step. I can do that part later. One of the steps you should not skip is a staged restore, where the data goes into a sandbox, a quarantine, something to make sure, am I not going to reintroduce malware back into the environment during my restoration exercise? And unfortunately, only 37% of orgs are using a sandbox or quarantine as part of their recovery. Now, let me be transparent here. This is hard, right? It does double your time, right? So you're going to have to restore that into a sandbox. You're going to have to test and make sure. If it's not clean, you got to restore a different copy instead. Not every backup software has the ability to drop it into a sandbox and then push it back into production afterwards. It is not a trivial task. But if you don't, remember how many organizations we said get hit 2, 3, 4, or more times? It's not because the bad actor breached you again. It's because you reinfected your own environment, or you just didn't patch all the holes.
Yep, exactly.
Right? So cannot overestimate how important it is to make sure that you are using sandboxing along the way. 37% are doing it today. If there is one stat that people need to go home and say, how do we do this? And ask somebody some hard questions on that, this is probably the number one thing. Bottom line, I will tell you, I had a poor experience when I was a middle school kid. The bully did take my lunch money more than once, right? And once they know that you will pay, they'll come back again. And for 63% of them, you made it awfully easy.
Yep.
All right, got a couple last things we kind of want to draw out. 8 was more organizations paid, but that could not recover than those that recovered without paying. Again, please don't be one of those, right? Let's get you past that. Number 9, the backup repository, right? So if you do not have the ability to save yourself, then the ransom becomes your only hope. And unfortunately, for 3 out of 4 organizations, the bad actor does successfully encumber your ability to save yourself. And then number 10, don't assume your old gear is going to be there, right? And in fact, when you download the data, you're going to find out that about 75% of organizations have the ability to recover to other infrastructure, whereas 85% can do to secondary infrastructure, whereas 75% can go to a cloud. And those numbers wonderfully add up to well more than 100%. The vast majority of organizations today do have the ability to fail over locally to a secondary data center and or to a cloud of choice as part of their overall plan, which is no different than if I have a flood. Well, if I just have a power outage in one building and I've got another building 3 blocks away, I'm good. If I have a flood, I can't use either of them. I need to fail over further away. This is the same kind of disaster recovery preparedness we've been talking about for the last 30 years. Now you just have to do it with cyber. And oh, by the way, plan for the cloud as an option. And then lastly, please do not reinfect yourself during the recovery, right? There's gonna be a huge amount of pressure. How quickly can you skip some of these steps and get going again? And that is rife for repeat effect. We've got, I think, 4 minutes left. And so let me just share with you just a couple lessons learned. Certainly we talked already about if you don't have a survivable repository, then you don't have the ability to recover from yourself. So I love the fact that most organizations do today have at least one tier of their data protection storage which can be made immutable. Now, can be is the right term. Not everybody turns this bit on.
Right.
Right? If you do, it does take up more storage because you're not overwriting in place anymore. If you don't, you lose the ability to save yourself. But aggregately, the two blue wedges, top option is to go to cloud storage. You've heard about a couple hyperscale clouds that do that pretty well at the event. Also, BAS and DRAS. I'm a huge fan of BAS and DRAS, not just because you get your data out of the building, but because you bring on some really smart people that do this every day. Right? So, but collectively, between those two blue wedges, 85% of organizations have a cloud repository which can be made immutable. 75%, there's some great storage vendors down on the show floor. You should go check them out. And oh, by the way, roughly 45% each of organizations are using either an object that has locking or an on-premise traditional NAS or DAS tier that allows for air gapping along the way. And oh, by the way, tape ain't dead yet. Lots of ways to get that done. All right, last stat for you. Even your on-prem disk, right? So this is another way to look at this. Average organization today says only 50% of their on-prem repositories are using immutable class storage. Right? And again, that first copy, that's what you're going to recover from almost all the time. Please, please flip that bit, check that box, make sure that data is immutable. We have 2 minutes left. We will take questions along the way. If we haven't told you already, go download the report. There's a lot more in it. You can email me. I'll give you the slides if you want them for your own internal presentations. If you're a partner, you're welcome to them. They're on ProPartner Portal. Thank you for your time. Hopefully this helps you have new conversations with your colleagues and your partners and your customers. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of Veeam On.